There's nothing quite like the moment. You realize that everything is slipping through your fingers when you thought you had control over your life. You believe your marriage is unshakable, that you've laid the foundations of trust. But what do you do when you discover that those foundations have secretly crumbled? Today, you'll witness a man's intense struggle when he finds out about his wife's betrayal, his fight to stay hopeful despite the infidelity, and how he confronts the harsh truth. But the story doesn't end here. This encounter is only the beginning. Get ready, because this story will take you deep. The moment of revelation is engraved in your mind like a nail. It was 3 months ago when I learned my wife had cheated on me, and my entire world collapsed. I confronted her, and with a fake look of regret, she apologized and said she wanted to save our marriage. I chose to believe her because hoping is the human way of holding on to life. I trusted her. I agreed to go to couples therapy to give our relationship a chance. She made me the usual promises that she loved me, didn't want a divorce, and that we would rebuild trust. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. A few weeks after therapy, she said, "But don't go behind my back and start checking up on me." At that moment, it felt more like a warning than a request. Still, I believed her. But the truth soon came out. She was still seeing him. I watched her silently, learned her plans, and made my decision. I had the divorce papers in my hand, but first, I needed to talk to her lover to see just how tangled my wife had become in his web. That day, I sat in my car for hours. I had decided to wait until either her lover or his wife left work. If he left first, I would follow him to his office and confront him there. If his wife left first, I would go straight to her door and face her. After waiting for hours, I realized just how tense I was. My whole body felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode. But as the waiting gnawed at me, my mind drifted back to the night before. Last night, I came home and acted like everything was normal. I cooked dinner, and we sat down to eat. She asked, as usual, how my day had been. I answered in one word: ordinary. We ate, played with the kids, put them to bed, and then sat in front of the TV as if nothing had happened. We didn't say a word for 2 hours. Finally, she said, "I'm going to bed," and went to the bedroom as if everything was fine. But she had no idea about the storm brewing inside me. I played games all night. There was no way I could sleep. By 5 a.m., my mind was still restless. That was when I made my decision. Today, during marriage counseling, I would lay everything out. I had already told the therapist about my plan. As soon as we sat down in the session, I didn't beat around the bush. "I spoke to your lover yesterday," I said. She didn't even flinch, replying calmly, "Yes, I talked to him too." I was shocked. This was too much. "Why are you still talking to him? I know you've been sneaking around behind my back," I said. She shrugged nonchalantly. "I needed answers. You weren't being honest." That's when I dropped the bomb. "He told me everything," I said. The shock on her face was like a scream. "What do you mean?" she asked. I told her that he had revealed all their secret meetings, their midnight phone calls, every detail. She broke down in tears. At that moment, I realized that all the lies she told me had already exposed the truth. I handed her the divorce papers and said just one word: "I want a divorce." As the therapist silently observed the situation, she stared at the papers. She looked at them as if they were something poisonous and pleaded desperately, "How can I fix this? I don't want a divorce. I want you. I want our family." But there was no turning back. The session ended in tears. I told her how I had been betrayed, how I had been made a fool. She realized that the fantasy world built on her lies had crumbled. As we left the session, she grabbed my hand and begged for forgiveness one last time. I pulled my hand away and coldly said, "It's over. I don't want you anymore." She collapsed to the ground sobbing, but I didn't look back, not even once. Afterward, I left a message for her lover's wife. I wanted to meet her, to tell her the truth. She had no idea what was going on, and she deserved to know how her husband had been cheating on her. When we met, her eyes were filled with pain, anger, and disbelief. I told her everything. At first, she didn't believe me, but when I showed her the evidence, the reality set in. and she broke down in tears. In that moment, I realized how hard it is to empathize with a stranger. But still, I stayed with her, refusing to let her endure this pain alone. When I finally got home, my wife was waiting for me. She started yelling in anger. "How could you tell them everything? Who gave you the right?" But I was calm. "They had a right to know the truth," I said. That night, after the kids went to bed, I sat alone in the silence that felt like an empty house. After dinner, we played with the kids for a while, tucked them in, and I tried to keep everything as normal as possible. But the anger and disappointment building inside me grew stronger with each passing minute. I was fighting an internal battle. On one hand, I knew there was no point in staying in this marriage. On the other, memories of the past and the love I once felt were holding me back. But there was no turning back now. That night, I poured myself a drink and replayed everything in my mind over and over. The next morning, the kids were cheerful, unaware of anything, as they ate breakfast and went off to school. Meanwhile, I was storming inside, but my face remained calm as I sent them off. When my wife took her bag and left the house, the sound of the door closing felt like the end of an era in my life. That week, I decided to talk to my wife again. By then, we were only speaking about the kids, and our lives were completely drifting apart. We went to see our therapist one more time. This time, we discussed how we would tell the kids the truth. They were oblivious to everything, while we were hiding a truth that would change their entire world. In the end, we made the decision and told them that we were getting a divorce. That moment was unforgettable. The kids didn't want to believe what we were saying and began crying as they clung to their mother. I took them in my arms and tried to comfort them, but something inside me had shattered. The pure sadness I saw in their eyes made me feel like the biggest failure in the world. They blamed their mother, but they were angry at me too. I wanted to explain everything to them, but the truth would hurt them even more. In the end, all I could say was, "Everything will be okay. We'll always be here for you." After a while, we stopped going to marriage counseling altogether. We both knew there was no going back, that this relationship could never be fixed. My wife was still trying to win me back. From time to time, she would try to touch me, talk about the old days, but I was no longer the person who would believe in that fairy tale. My trust in her was completely destroyed, and now the only thing I cared about was providing a good future for my children. Months passed, and somehow my life started to fall back into place. I had to sell my house because there was no point in staying there anymore. My wife continued to come and go for a few weeks, but eventually, she decided to move to a new place. The divorce process was moving quickly. The hardest part was making everything official, seeing our relationship reduced to a few signatures on a piece of paper. Watching years of memories end like that eats away at you. But in the end, you have no choice but to accept it. One day, my wife tried to hug me again. The desperation in her eyes made me hesitate for a moment, but that embrace was nothing more than an echo of the past. It was a road we could never return to. I gently pushed her away and told her that this time it was really over. This marriage no longer held any meaning beyond raising our children. That day, I said goodbye to her for the last time. Today, I'm trying to start a new chapter in my life. As my children go through this process, being there for them is my greatest responsibility. My wife has started a new life of her own. We meet occasionally for the sake of the kids, but I feel nothing for her anymore. I remember her only as the ghost of a life that once was. Yet with each passing day, I know I'm growing stronger.